Thanks for having us. I'm Olivia Solon. I hope that's obvious from the pre-introduction. But we're here to talk about the end of search as we know it. And Apple and Google have both invested heavily in what they're calling virtual assistants. Apple has the very famous Siri, and more recently, Google has launched Google Now. And it's been integrated into the MotoX phone. But have they lived up to expectations? The endless YouTube videos that seem to document their shortfalls suggest otherwise, and perhaps a little bit more on the Siri side than the Google Now side in that case. Is this the end of search as we know it? And what are the privacy implications that come about with these virtual assistants and the additional data that they collect? Now, to help me answer some of these questions, we have two wonderful panelists. We have Adam Cheyer, who was the founder of Siri, and woo!
Good to see you, Vienna.
You've got a lot of fans. And we have Vishal Sharma, who was most recently VP at Google, where he headed up Google Now. So welcome him as well. Now, before we get going on the discussion, I have a big caveat. Both Adam and Vishal have actually left their respective companies. So although they can speak very knowledgeably about the technology, they're not speaking as representatives of those companies. They're just expressing their opinions. Any predictions they make don't reflect the roadmap of the companies that they used to work at. So we've got that out of the way. Now, just to get a sense of who we've got in the room, I wanted to see if you could put your hands up if you've used Siri before. I can't see, well, loads of people. What about if you've tried experimenting with Google Now? Slightly fewer people. Now, hands up if you've been frustrated by either of those technologies. OK, so quite interesting place to start there, then. I wanted to start, if you could just both of you briefly describe the technology of your respective virtual assistants, just so we can kind of see how they differ.
Sure. So Siri was a startup. We had a vision that we built. We launched a free app, and then eventually sold it to Apple. The idea for Siri was to be a do engine versus a search engine. At the time, Google was dominant. And what we used to say was, if you want to get to a web page, use a search engine. If you want to get something done, use a do engine. And we had doengine.com was our domain name for a while. So the idea of Siri and what it's good at is it knows certain domains. It has sets of services that it can perform actions and queries for you. So you can say, get me a restaurant tonight, 2 people, romantic, somewhere around Palo Alto. You can say, book a restaurant. Buy me movie tickets, a hotel, send a taxi to my house. These are all things that the original Siri app did. So it was about getting things done more quickly in certain domains and areas that it knew and understood deeply.
Google Now has 2 basic components to it. One of them has a lot of features that it shares with Siri. It's essentially a voice search functionality. But it's more than just search in the sense that there are some actions that it does as well. You can ask it to set your alarm for a certain time. You can ask it to book a meeting for you, things of that nature. But the more interesting, in some sense, from the Google perspective, second component has to do with these predictive cards that show up, which essentially look at search queries you've done in the past. They examine your email, and then based on your location, they'll surface things such as, it seems like you have a meeting in this particular location at 10 a.m. If you want to be on time, given the current traffic conditions, you should leave now. That has found some degree of resonance with people. So those are the 2 pieces. OK,
so you've said what it's supposed to be, what both of them are supposed to be. What do you think is the biggest challenge that each of those technologies faces, or that perhaps it hasn't necessarily achieved? Let's start with you, Adam.
Sure. So what I would say is expectation management. So clearly, despite being able to say lots of funny things to Siri, it's not a human, and people know that. And it really is designed to do certain tasks well. But when you interact, it's hard to know what can you say, what can't you say, and that's still an area that's developing. I would say probably the key message that I would have for people here, takeaway from virtual assistants, virtual assistants for me are at a stage where the web was in 1994. You had a web page with static pages and a kind of ugly browser, and you could squint and look at the vector that someday there'd be YouTube and TV and media and commerce and reinvent all of these. I believe you have to think of Siri and Google Now and assistants in a similar vein. It will become a mode of interaction that's increasingly here and everywhere and helps you with your tasks, but it's still in early stages, and you have to get used to it and have sort of the expectation management that there's still ways to go, and it will improve rapidly.
Do you think that using the human voice didn't help matters because people have higher expectations of this AI that they think can communicate with them really easily?
Certainly having an interaction, a conversational interaction, humanizes something, and that's a benefit and a risk. If it doesn't work, people get angry. They're like, hey, this is not
Ooh, yes.
more than just a kind of a dumb, or not dumb, a traditional software system. So there is risk of doing it. But speech is a great way, if your hand's free, if the screen is small, it's hard to type. And in its early days, people do talk to Siri and Google Now, and the system will get better. And the only way to improve speech systems is through usage. And for the first time ever, usage is on a huge scale.
Vishal, what do you think is the biggest challenge for Google Now?
Yeah, I actually totally agree with the stuff that Adam said. To me, speech recognition is still in its infancy. Anyone that has, for instance, an accent like I do, when I speak in English, has experienced some of the issues that existing speech recognition systems have. Even beyond that, there's then the underlying issue of natural language processing. And often, that Siri can book you a restaurant, or Google Now can set up potentially a meeting for you. But if you phrase it wrong, and it could be in perfectly good English or perfectly good German, and for some reason, it won't get mapped to the right thing. And so that degree of kind of robustness and flexibility that's required for a system to be prime time ready is still missing. On the predictive side, Google Now works really well because there are a set of use cases, like the commute use case that I just described, and there's several others, which have been formulated and they've been pressed, into use. Just keeping those coming and expanding out that repertoire is fairly challenging. It's actually very non-trivial to do that. Luckily, Google has a long runway. They have lots and lots of information and do many useful things. So there's a lot of progress still to come. But all those things put together make it pretty challenging. On top of that, now you have this device proliferation and breakage, right? So pretty soon there's going to be watches, we hope, that people will be wearing, and they'll have a completely different form factor. You're going to have assistants in your car, and you'll be talking to them. And there's going to be other form factors, I'm sure, stuff that you wear around your head, and so on. And each one of them requires a different UI, different behavior, different interaction. And obviously, you're not going to create a completely different assistant for all of them. So how do you bring all this stuff together? Like Adam said to me, you're launching on a 10 to 15-year journey in what could potentially be the next phase of information retrieval technology. And that's where we are. Very immature, very green.
Okay. Now, most of us would refer to Google as a search engine or a search giant, but actually, it's relatively recently rebranded its search division as a knowledge division. And at Google I/O earlier this year, Amit Singhal said that this was the, what was he saying? He said the end of search as we know it. And I was hoping that you could elaborate a little bit on what he meant by this.
So Amit's a really smart man. Actually, I'd encourage people to watch that video, and I think he kind of laid it out fairly well. And in some sense, the world is moving away from being satisfied with, typing in a well-formulated query in your mind, and then typing that in and receiving information. And it's moving more and more. One way to put it would be in the direction of grasping intent. What is this person intending to do if they say a certain thing to me? Or even if they fail to say a certain thing to me. So when someone's going to hop in their car and go for this meeting, they're intending to go on this commute. They could look up commute time and that kind of information, but they shouldn't have to. You should be able to grasp that intent. So it's moving away from the traditional, I think of something, then I translate it to a query, then I go type it out in a search box, and then stuff comes up into this new domain. And obviously, the devices and the mode of interaction, natural language, and all those things. Hopefully gestures soon. It's just different.
Adam, we were chatting before we came on stage, and you mentioned that those particular words that Amit Singhal spoke kind of resonated with you.
Yeah, so we were a small startup, a handful of people dreaming a big vision, but we used to visualize the future. And on internal presentations, we would do these fake magazine covers. So we had Wire magazine, but we manipulated the front page and things like that. And one of the Siri, our internal, presentation things, we said, the end of search as we know it, enter the age of the virtual personal assistant. And we had a picture of, Google kind of getting squeezed out, representing search, moving in, Siri. And it felt at the time so audacious and crazy. And so when the head of search or knowledge for Google uttered those words and said it's about conversational context, proactivity, and personalization, I got chills down my spine because I'm like, somehow a little startup, the message got through, and the Apples and the Googles and others of the world, Samsungs, are moving into this vision, into this new age, and it really, is very exciting and scary and gratifying to me.
It's a huge, huge vindication, actually. In hindsight, you could think about Siri and the way it does things and say, of course, why would it be different? And at that time, though, very, very bold. And yes, it's a huge vindication, I think.
So on this idea of the conversational search, this is something that Siri did from the very beginning, and Google now is introducing elements of this. But how important is it for virtual assistants to have this conversational approach?
So there are a few different aspects to conversation. The first is the words, and the second is kind of the back and forth interaction with context. So we were imagining, what if there were a Google of web services where you want to book a table, but if you say, book a table for 2 at 8, you have to actually understand the words to be able to perform the service. And sometimes people won't include that. They'll say, book a table tonight, and it'll say for how many, it needs to ask how many people. So we used kind of a more vocal, word-like, human-like interaction. Google now took a slightly different approach. But the fact that the user can express something, the system can come back and express something, and it's a back and forth context, I think is essential for the new age. Whether, like I said, it's done more with chat bubbles or with predictive cards, you need that. And in the old Siri, and even today, you could say, I'm going to San Francisco, what's the weather going to be? Okay, great, get me a restaurant, this weekend. Oh, it's for 2 people. And you're building up a task context. And I think that's very much important in this new shift. I've seen even Google desktop search is moving to start to have this more conversational context that's preserved.
How much headway has Siri made versus Google now, do you think, Vishal?
So I think Siri's definitely been much bolder with respect to the conversational aspect, much more risky in some sense. On the other hand, Google has the search function, and it's kind of evolved from there, and it's making things a little bit more conversational. So recently, it had the Hummingbird release, where you can ask it things like, who is the president of the United States? How old is he? How tall is he? And it infers from your past, queries what the context is, and it makes it a little bit more conversational. Siri, on the other hand, just kind of threw the doors wide open and said, you can talk to this like you can talk to a human being. Going back to the original question, I feel like, first of all, there's some context like when you're in a car, where you have to be in an eyes-free context, where there is really no alternative to having a conversation. You just have to have a conversation. Secondly, it is such a gratifyingly human interaction process. All of us here have evolved to converse, and we want to do that with things, and so that's happened. And even to the extent that companies, Google or whoever, have tried not to be persona-based conversations, if you will. There's often still a personified aspect that keeps emerging. So, OK Glass, for instance, is how you invoke glass. And it's almost like there's an entity that you're poking, and you're trying to wake it up and have a conversation with it.
Well, that brings us quite nicely onto the idea of devices. You mentioned glass, you've mentioned previously smart cars, and there are rumored smartwatches from both Apple and Google, I think if you believe the Wall Street Journal this week. And what role do virtual assistants play within the context of all these multiple devices? And perhaps we can start with Adam on this one.
So I think to touch on Vishal's point, speech shouldn't be the only form of interaction, but it's a component. And I said, Steve Jobs was trying to get us to join his company. And I said, here's what I believe. And if you believe it, we're kind of on the same page. I said, if it's on the screen, the easiest way is to reach out and touch it. And in a sense, the iPhone revolutionized mobile by having a better, more natural touch screen. But if it's off the screen, the easiest way is to ask for it. And for me, the ultimate interaction is when it's so natural, it's multimodal, that you're talking and working and gesturing, and you combine it all so you're not even thinking about it, and it's keeping that context. So whenever you look at devices like watches or glasses or new earbuds or who knows what it's going to be, virtual reality, I think the principle of if it's on the screen, manipulate it directly. If it's off the screen, ask for it, and you want the context so I can say, I want this to do something, and ask for something, some action off the screen. On Siri today, there's an example. You can be in your email application, and you scroll to an email, you click, and then you say, oh, call him. And it will actually say, oh, him? It must be the person who sent that email, and it'll pick up that context from Visible. That's been in Siri from kind of day one on the Apple version. But there's an example of manipulating directly when you can, asking for actions that there's no call button on an email client when you can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think devices are reshaping just so much that the impact is absolutely staggering, and they're getting more heterogeneous, and they're getting more. The multiplicity of them is just going up astronomically. I mean, think about all the iPads and little phones, etc. you have at home. Soon you're going to have watches. Then you'll have these things in the car. They're everywhere, and each one of them imposes a certain constraint that we took for granted with the big screen computers. Now all of a sudden you have a small little screen, and doing something as trivial as looking up the rating of a book on Amazon.com is much harder. And so you want a simpler way to do it, or booking a restaurant and going to a website and making a reservation, just so much harder. So you want a simpler way to do it, and that's forced an evolution. That's pushing, actually, if you think about natural language processing and speech recognition and how much progress they made in the past, 25 years. I'll go out on a limb and say in the last 5 years, it's been equivalent to that or much more, and it's still expanding faster, forced by the device. Watches are going to have force a similar situation. So I think the device is actually driving a lot of this stuff. It's synergistic.
Okay. Now, you've both talked about the kind of challenges that the technologies that you worked on yourselves face. But I wanted to ask that question about each other's technology. Like, what do you think is the biggest weakness? Well, Adam, what do you think is the biggest weakness with Google Now? And Vishal, what do you think is the biggest weakness with Siri? You can't get fired, so it's okay.
That's an interesting question. So I think both Google Now and Siri pushed some borders, which is fairly daring for big companies to do, push some boundaries in certain areas. So maybe Siri was pushing the conversational a little more than maybe they should have. I don't know. For me, Google Now, one of its key traits is this proactive, giving you what you want before you've even asked for it. That's pretty bold, and it's something I wouldn't have dared do, perhaps, with Siri. In a way, and when it works, it's absolutely magical. It's like, wow, I was just going to ask that question. There it is at my fingertips. I didn't even ask. But, these are early days, so it doesn't always work. And a friend of mine, he uses Google Now a lot. He happens to work next to a train station, and every time a train goes by, up pops a train schedule from Google Now, thinking, well, you're at a train station, you must. And he's like, no, I work next to a train station. So it's not perfect. So it's not a criticism. I'm impressed by the boldness. to take the risk. And the only way these kinds of technologies are going to evolve is if you put them out there and learn from real-world use, both conversational and maybe the predictive. And so I didn't dare do it. And it's not really a criticism, but it's, again, if you were to ding it for one thing, it's, boy, it looks stupid that it's predicting I want to go to this restaurant, at 8 o'clock, or whatever predictions it makes. If it's not what you were thinking or wanted, it's an annoyance, and that can be a problem.
Criticism of Siri. To me, having a completely conversational agent sitting out there and talking to you was extremely bold. And like I said, it kind of opened this door, which people have hesitated from opening for a long time, especially serious people in commercial software have stayed away from that stuff for the past 10, 15, 20 years. But I almost feel like, having opened the door, Apple has kind of refused to walk through it. And it's a little bit like you've taken all the dings and you've taken all the brickbats that have come from opening the door, and people even, you can ridicule many of Siri's responses, but at the same time, it is a very natural way for humans to interact. Like, who would deny that? And so if you've taken the risk, you should try and reap some of the rewards. So, for example, I'd say, think of all the random things people say to Siri, right? Will you marry me? How old are you? Where do you live? Blah, blah, blah. And you could also say stuff like, I hate where I live, or I hate my job, or I'm thinking I really need a vacation, Siri. And Siri doesn't do anything immediately useful with it, but now you've given it a certain context, right? You hate your job? Well, maybe I should start serving you information about other places you could potentially work, or even ask you things like, well, what do you do for a living, Adam?
Go work at Apple. No.
Right? So it just feels like a conversational system is less intent dense than a search query. But at the same time, there's a lot more conversation that happens in the same way as a search query is less intent dense than a database query, which is very precise. But you can do searches much more easily, and you can have random conversational threads much more easily. And you could tell Siri so much about yourself, and it should be able to do something useful with it. And I feel like someone should think about that. Someone here should think about that.
So hang on, so you're saying you think that Google now is too ambitious, and you're saying that Siri didn't go far enough, or doesn't go far enough. Is that right?
I didn't say too ambitious. I said I
Bold.
wouldn't have been that. I didn't take that step, and
Okay.
I'm impressed and watching that they did take that step.
I'm saying if you paid the price to get in, you might as well enjoy the party.
So I guess a really interesting distinction is the levels of data that each service or collects. Now, Google is an advertising business at its core, and it makes money by learning about its users, whereas Apple's focused on hardware, and Siri is kind of promised not to be too invasive in terms of privacy. And I kind of, well, at least it claims to do that. And I wanted to talk to you guys about what that means and what new privacy challenges arise with these virtual assistants, particularly as they're becoming contextually aware and starting to predict your behaviors.
I guess I'll start. So I think that is an excellent point. Whenever you look at a company, you have to think about, how do they make their money? And so the models, you think of Google Now and Siri was very similar, and both want to be personalized. They want to, get to know the user better so that they can help them better. But there are two, in my view, different takes on how to do that. So with Google, Google has your Gmail, they have your calendar, they have a lot of information about the user, which is great. Largely it's for driving ads, but they can be more personalized. They can, walk through that door in a sense where they know a lot about you. That's good. It does raise some risks in this world. You always have to trade off the convenience that can be brought for the fact that there's a company who knows a lot about you and is serving up ads for various reasons. With Apple, they're a hardware company, as you mentioned. Some of my view of the reasons they didn't push it as far as maybe they could have or should have was this reticence to get to know too much about the user. When you think about Siri, you say something simple as call my wife. At least when I was there, the Siri servers do not know who your wife is. And so when you say that, you can say that to Siri, it will come back to your phone, which is a performance hit, and say, is there a contact labeled wife, on this phone? Okay, now I can make the number. But it's, so I think Apple's made choices where everything personal pretty much remains on your phone and they don't know it, which means if you ask a personal question, they have to come back, fetch it in a transient way. So it's a trade-off, and I think it's a trade-off for users when they choose products. It's a trade-off for the option settings that they say what do they want to give to these products. But ultimately, convenience does rely on personalization.
Okay.
Yeah, it's tough to be a personal assistant without actually knowing something about the person. So there needs to be a lot of information you disclose to your virtual assistant. And I think it's really important to have a lot of transparency around this information. And as long as products and companies are providing a certain degree of control. So for instance, yes, you track my commute every day. And I appreciate that when I wake up in the morning and I get in my car, you're telling me to take this different route from the one I normally do because of traffic conditions and because you know where I need to get to. That's great. However, I'm taking this one trip that I want you to forget and not know about. And having that degree of control might be important. Similarly, just making the connection between benefit and the information you're collecting is just very, very crucial. Very crucial. And I mean, think about all the things your phone knows about you. Regardless of what brand of phone you carry, it knows where you are. And literally, by correlating across people here, you could probably even tell who hangs out with who in this crowd. You could probably even infer things about what is common between people here just based on cell phone location usage, right? What kind of places do you like going to? We could figure that out. Probably what language you speak. Even without having any language info, based on your phone data alone, you could probably infer all that stuff. So it's out there. There'll be more of it out there, so managing it is very important.
Before we go to a few questions from the audience, I want to ask, should we be concerned about the amount of data that is being collected on us with these virtual assistants?
I would say people will be concerned with the amount of data collected from any technology, from using your email system, using your shopping habits.
One sentence,
et cetera.
Should we be concerned?
My one sentence would be each user should think about how they want to manage their trade-offs between privacy and convenience.
Yeah, he stole my word. I would say trade-off, one word.
Is Google getting the trade-off right?
Yes, I think that's important. Different people will sit at different points of the continuum of how personalized do I want my service to be versus how much do I want the world to forget about me.
Okay. Right, and we've got some time for some questions for the audience. So has anyone got a question? I can't actually see anyone, so... Oh, everyone's being shy. Oh, no, there's one there.
We should take the Slido questions.
Oh,
because
okay.
That's the coolest. Thank you so much for this panel. If you can stand up and let's see what the audience has here. So the most upvoted question right now is the first one. How do you see the monetization of the virtual assistants, crystal ball gazing? It's nice to have function, but not a must function. Any comments on that? Gentlemen?
I'll quickly take that. So the original Siri model as a startup where we had to worry about what's the business model was about easing the cost, how hard it is to achieve transactions. And so by bringing users, by making it easy to book hotels and restaurants, we would do CPA, cost per action, and that was kind of a monetization of the original Siri. For Apple, it's clear they want to sell more devices. That's their monetization strategy. So
I'll give a philosophical answer to this question, which is a real luxury for monetization questions, right? And I'll say this. I'll say virtual assistants are like the browser because they're going to interact with so many different things. So there will not be one way to monetize virtual assistants in the same way as there is not one way to monetize the internet. There'll be advertising, there'll be stuff being sold to you, all of that stuff.
Okay. What about one more? Perhaps this one, we talked about this backstage as well, how the advertising can be friendly integrated into voice search. So when you're doing voice search, how is that going to come up with maybe add words, so to say, or something like that? Maybe Google is.
You're the advertising company guy. I'll let you answer that.
I mean, so one thing that, obviously the annoying thing about voice ads is that you can't, you have to listen to them, and they're sequential in nature. And if you're in a multi-mode kind of situation where maybe an ad gets flashed at you as opposed to it being voice alone, that might be useful. I don't know. I think maybe there's some pioneering work to be done here where, it's helping you with voice, and in the middle of it, it just shouts out like a name like Samsung.
Oh, Google now can actually listen to TV in the background, though, can't it? Well, there is a tool that Google has that will listen to the TV and deliver contextual information, which at the moment I don't think is sponsored, but so for me, that strikes me as an obvious place where you could then deliver ad-funded content.
Yeah, which is exactly, that was a previous point I was making in general, somewhat facetiously, was that when you run a voice search today, you essentially say something, but then these search results come up in like a page, and the ads there, just like they would be with a normal ad. So it's running AdWords or what have you, depending on the platform you're using. And this would be somewhat similar. So if it's listening to, for instance, a television program in the background and can just automatically recognize what you're watching, it could show those ads as well.
There's one comment, so let me just interrupt briefly. This is more a challenge for the audience or a statement for the audience. I mean, here we are at the greatest entrepreneur conference I've seen, perhaps. And for me, the message I want you to take away is that Google's, Apple's, others are saying we're entering the beginning of an age of virtual assistants. And that means there's a whole bunch, monetization opportunities, interaction opportunities out there to do the next big breakthrough. And Siri started as a startup with 3 people and found our way to get out into hundreds of millions of devices. The challenge I give for you and what you should walk away thinking about is, what can I do as an entrepreneur here to kind of jump in and be the next breakthrough that may be needed for virtual assistants?
I completely concur.
I think that's the perfect way to end this panel. Please thank the gentleman and Olivia for their time.